Tonight's story is a gentle one. We'll climb to a quiet monastery above a sleeping valley, where a young novice stands beside a great bronze bell and faces a choice no chronicle will ever record: to pull the rope and send his world to war, or to let the morning unfold in untouched silence. No armies, no banners, just stone, wind, and a bell that never finds its voice. So now, dim your screen, turn off the lights, settle into your pillow, and let the bell that never rang begin. The monastery did not crown the hill so much as cling to it, a cluster of stone and shadow holding its breath above the valley. From a distance, it seemed almost accidental, as if some wandering ridge had paused mid-step and hardened into walls, cloisters, and a tower that reached not for heaven, but for a clearer view of ordinary days. Dawn came slowly to this height. The first light did not arrive in the courtyard or the chapel, but at the very top, in the narrow tower where the newest bell waited for a voice. The sky's pale gray slid along its bronze curve before touching anything else, as though testing the world upon metal. The novice climbed towards that light before the others had quite shaken sleep from their bones. The staircase was carved into the stone like a spiral thought, worn smooth by years of sandals and small hesitations. Each step carried the faint smell of old incense, cold dust, and the iron tang of the bell above, a scent that had settled into his days so thoroughly he could no longer tell where it ended and his own breath began. His hands knew the rhythm of the climb. One brushed the wall, fingers tracing shallow grooves left by those who had gripped it before him. The other held a simple cloth and a small jar of oil, humble tools for a task that felt larger than the rule books ever mentioned. His feet kept count. 67 steps from the lower door to the place where the tower narrowed, and another 17 to the small, draft-lit chamber where the bell hung waiting. He always paused on the last step. It had become a private ritual, not written in any manual of duties. At that point, the tower opened just enough to let in a blade of dawn, thin and colorless, falling directly across the bell like a column of cool water. In that pause, he allowed himself a single unmonastic thought: that the bell looked less like an object and more like a frozen moment, a sound that had hardened into shape and was now suspended between never and someday. It hung from a timber beam darkened by age and smoke, its surface neither perfect nor crude. If one knew where to look, faint memories of its previous lives still remained. The ghost of a sword hilt near the rim, a warped suggestion of a horseshoe near the crown, edges softened where metal had flowed and swallowed what it once had been. Weapons and tools had melted down together in the casting furnace, enemy steel and farmer's iron indistinguishable in the heat. Those who had donated them liked to imagine they had given their sins to be purified into sound. The novice was less sure anything was ever so neatly transformed. He stepped into the small tower chamber, and the cold gathered around his ankles like water. The wind threaded in through the narrow slits that passed for windows, carrying a hint of wood smoke from the valley and the distant, uncertain smell of river mist. He could hear the world below before he saw it, a single dog barking, then remembering it was too early, the clink of a pail against stone, the soft chattering of someone scolding chickens that did not yet understand the importance of time. He approached the bell as one approaches a sleeping animal that might startle. Lifting the cloth, he began to wipe the bronze in slow, circular motions, following the curve from the lip up towards the crown. The bell did not move. It had never rung. Its tongue hung still, a dull, heavy presence within its hollow body, as patient and inert as a held breath. It should have been simple. The duties written for him were straightforward: keep the stairs swept, the tower free of cobwebs, the bell clean of dust and birds' droppings. "Ready," the abbot had said in passing, as though this were another jug to be filled or another bench to be scrubbed. Keep it ready. Readiness, he was learning, was not an empty state. It was a kind of tension that settled into the stone, into the ropes, into the tightness at the base of his own skull. The bell existed at a point where time touched itself. Not yet used, yet already promised a task that would carve its way through the valley like a new riverbed. He worked in silence, and the cloth moved. Light changed almost imperceptibly. The dust motes around the bell rode drafts in the air, like drifting prayers that had not yet settled. When he had finished one side, he stepped back and looked up, as he always did, towards the small crossing of beams above, as if expecting some sign that the work was approved. Nothing answered but the faint thrum of the wind. Only then did he step towards the openings in the tower and lean out just far enough to see the valley. Morning was unfastening itself below. The color deepened in the strip of river that cut through the low ground, moving from gray to a tired blue. Small curls of smoke rose from scattered roofs as households coaxed reluctant embers back into flame. Someone had already taken a mule out along the path toward the fields. Its hooves left darker marks in the damp earth, like notes on a line of music. When he had first been assigned to the bell tower, he had assumed its purpose would be straightforward: to call the brothers to prayer, to mark the hours, to warn of fire or flood. Bells were the monastery's great lungs, drawing breath and releasing it as sound, reminding both monks and valley that time did not belong to them. But this bell had not been given a voice, only a place. It had been raised into the tower amid a flurry of activity months ago. Ropes and pulleys and shouted instructions, men straining as they guided the heavy bronze shape through the narrow opening. There had been a blessing, a brief wash of Latin over metal. There had been talk of new rules from the city below, of alliances and threats, and the need to be ready to gather men quickly. Then there had been nothing. The old bells still rang the hours. They tolled for deaths and feasts and storms, each one with a different weight of sound, familiar and settled. This new bell rested in their shadows, a silent stranger among elder voices. Days became weeks, and no order to ring it had come. Dust, however, did not know how to wait. It arrived faithfully each day, thin and indifferent. Every speck an argument against the idea that purpose alone would keep something clean. So the novice polished and watched and listened. From his height, he had learned the minor language of the valley, the slap of wet laundry beaten against a rock, the rhythmic thud of grain being ground in a mill that never stopped complaining, the brief clamor of geese when someone trespassed too close to their patch of ground. These sounds had no place in chronicles or sermons, yet they were the true measure of whether a day had passed in peace. Sometimes, when the older monks spoke in the refectory or cloister, their talk bent towards affairs of power, which noble was leaning towards which alliance, which family had angered which guild, whether the city would follow this banner or that if fighting reopened the scars of old rivalries. Their words flowed around names he barely knew, rivers of influence and grievance that had begun long before he was born and would continue long after he was gone. In those moments, the bell tower became a refuge. Up there, the valley was not a chessboard for unseen hands, but a breathing landscape of countless small lives, each with its own fragile agreements with hunger, weather, and hope. The novice found himself measuring the day less by the canonical hours and more by other markers. The moment when the first child's laughter floated faintly upwards, the metallic rhythm of a blacksmith's hammer starting up. the way a certain cart always passed along the low road when the sun had shifted just so. The bell, meanwhile, silently collected light. Morning after morning, the metal drank in the sky's changing moods. On clear days, it reflected a thin band of brightness along its rim, a halo that moved when one walked around it. On stormy mornings, the bronze grew dull, as if muttering with the clouds, its surface darkening to match the brewing heavens. In winter, frost would sometimes lace itself along the underside where the air was still, a delicate white line tracing the bell's shadowed lip. He began, without quite deciding to think of the bell as an observer like himself. It faced outwards in all directions, its wide mouth turned perpetually towards the world it might one day address. It had been made from metal that had already known violence and work. It had felt the furnace's fury and the mold's confinement. Now it waited in a quiet that was neither peace nor neglect. On some mornings when the chill bit deeper and his fingers ached through the thin cloth, the novice wondered what the first strike would feel like, whether the sound would pass through his bones like a blow or slip around him like water, whether the valley would stiffen in fear at the unfamiliar tone or accept it as merely another command in a language it had always obeyed. The possibility hovered there, unspoken. A single future hovering above many others, heavy and untested, until that day came, if it came at all. His task was simple enough. Keep the way clear, keep the bell clean, keep the tower free from the small, creeping claims of neglect. There was comfort in that simplicity, a narrow path between questions he could not answer. He gave the metal one last, slow pass with the cloth, watching as the faint smear of his own breath evaporated from the bronze. Then he stepped back, letting the light and the bell and the restless air share the space without him. Below, the first true notes of the day were lifting themselves into the air. A rooster, late and indignant. The soft boom of one of the older bells marking the hour. The low murmur of voices as the brothers crossed the courtyard like shadows that had learned to move in unison. The new bell did not answer. It waited in the high, narrow chamber, polished and unused, holding inside its hollow body a silence that felt less like absence and more like a word the world had not yet chosen to say. The days following one another did not feel like repetition so much as variation on a theme. From the tower, the novice began to hear how each morning was slightly different from the last, as if the valley were playing the same song on 100 shifting instruments. At first, he had listened without attention, letting the sounds wash around him like water around a stone. In time, though, the ear he brought to scripture and chant turned outward. The world below, which had once been a vague spread of roofs and fields, began to resolve into distinct notes, each belonging to someone who would never climb these steps. The river had its own voice. It spoke in low continuities, a constant murmur beneath the day that only changed when rain swelled it or drought thinned it. On clear mornings, its sound was a soft, steady exhalation, the patient work of water against stone. After storms, it clenched and shouted, carrying branches and debris, announcing its displeasure to anyone who would listen. The novice learned to judge the river's mood before he even saw its surface, just from the tone that rose up the hillside. The mills along its banks added their complaints to the chorus. Their wheels creaked and groaned, never quite satisfied, turning grain into flour with a rhythm that seemed always on the edge of breaking. Each mill had its own mechanical accent, a particular squeal on the downward turn, a hollow thump when a worn board hit its mark, a brief pause when someone inside stopped to adjust a stone. Over weeks, he came to know which mill was working too hard, which one would soon need repairs, which one had fallen silent, waiting for hands to return. The monastery bells continued their measured work. They spoke in Latin syllables of time, translating the day into prayer and pause. Yet even they began to feel, to the novice, like only one layer of sound among many. When they rang, he could hear beneath their ordered tones the stubborn persistence of other noises that did not care for schedules. A baby crying, a dog barking at some unseen offense, the crash of something dropped in a courtyard where someone would soon be scolded. On some mornings, a cart would rumble along the lower road at the same hour, its wheels finding every rut with lazy certainty. The donkey that pulled it had a distinctive way of protesting each incline, a drawn-out bray that rose like a question and fell like a resigned answer. He never saw the driver's face clearly from such a distance, but he learned to imagine his posture, leaning forward on cold days, slouched on warm ones, sometimes humming, sometimes cursing under his breath. The sound of wood against earth, hoof against stone, became a moving line he could follow with his eyes, even when the cart itself was hidden behind trees. Children announced themselves with inconsistency. Their laughter came in bursts, sharp and bright as scattered coins. Sometimes it burst forth near the river, where they must have been skipping stones or daring one another to wade deeper. Sometimes it flared in the narrow streets, where a game had broken out between chores. The novice could not tell how many children there were, but he learned to recognize certain patterns. A high, ringing peal, always followed by a lower, wheezing chuckle. A shriek that sounded more indignant than frightened, as if someone's prize had been snatched away only to be returned a moment later. Not all recurring sounds were joyful. There was a cough in one of the houses halfway down the slope, persistent and dry, that punctuated the mornings with a regularity more reliable than any clock. It came in short, clustered bursts, then a pause, then another wave. As the weeks passed, the cough lengthened, deepened, sometimes refused to stop, until the novice, listening, found himself holding his breath with the unknown sufferer, waiting for release. He never saw who it belonged to. Yet he could not climb the tower stairs without wondering if it would greet him again, or if one morning it would simply not be there. Inside the monastery, the rhythms were more controlled but no less distinct. The scrape of benches as the brothers rose in unison, the almost synchronized clearing of throats before chant, the soft slap of sandals along the cloister. There was the particular way Brother Matteo dropped his spoon into his bowl at the end of each meal with a muffled clink, always a heartbeat before the abbot signaled dismissal. The novice, listening for bells and valleys, began to hear these smaller habits too, the tiny syncopations that betrayed personality within the press of routine. Once, as he wiped the bell's bronze flank with his usual slow care, he realized he had begun to anticipate certain sounds before they reached him. He turned towards the lower road, just before the cart emerged from behind a copse of trees, as if summoned by an invisible cue. He paused, cloth hovering just short of metal, seconds before the distant mill wheel gave its familiar protesting squeal. The world below was beginning to feel less like a chaos of unconnected noises and more like a pattern, complicated, shifting, but nonetheless patterned. He wondered, not without unease, whether this was how the chroniclers and politicians heard events, not as discrete lives but as tendencies, as trajectories, as signs. The difference, he told himself, was that no one would ever ask him to turn these observations into decisions. His attention was harmless. It changed nothing. Even as he thought this, he knew it was not entirely true. To listen closely was already to begin to care. Sometimes, after his work was done, he would rest his forearms on the rough stone of the tower's low opening and simply let the valley's soundscape move through him. He would close his eyes and try to locate every noise as if his hearing were a net cast wide and fine. A door slamming, up left, near the road. A goat bleating in protest, far right, closer to the forest edge. A distant, faint clatter of something ceramic breaking, somewhere near the square, followed by a brief hush as others paused to see what had happened. There were mornings when a fog rolled in thick and soft, muffling the valley until it was little more than a vague, damp murmur. Those days felt like the inside of a held breath. Sound reached him dulled, uncertain. Footsteps on paths became whispers. The mill's complaints turned to indistinct groans. The river's voice moved closer, amplified by the dew-laden air, its course through the lowlands sounding almost like a chant sung by an unseen choir. On such mornings, the silent bell loomed even larger. The novice could imagine with too much clarity how a single strike upon it would cut through the fog, shearing the gauze of quiet, giving everything below a common direction in which to turn its head. The idea alone made his shoulders tighten. He would find himself laying a hand against the bell's side, feeling the cold stillness of the metal, as if confirming that no sound had yet escaped without his consent. In the refectory, the older monks sometimes spoke nostalgically of the times when bells had been the only true messengers, when war or plague or fire were known first by the way the air vibrated. They told stories of nights when the bells had rung until the ropes were nearly frayed, when the echo had clung to the hills long after the danger had resolved into memory. To them, the bell tower was a weapon and a sanctuary both, a place where sound and authority intertwined. The novice listened, head bowed, tracing knots in the wooden table with his eyes, thinking of the cough halfway down the slope, of the cart's complaining wheels, of the mill that would soon need repair. None of those sounds would ever be called history, yet if they ceased, the valley would feel, to him, unrecognizably altered. One late afternoon, when the sky lay low and heavy, he climbed the tower later than usual. The light had thickened to a dull gold, the kind that made even stone seem tired. Below, the valley was going about its business at a slower tempo, as if every movement were weighed before being made. The mills turned. The river murmured. The cough came, then subsided. Somewhere, a dog barked 3 times in what sounded like habit more than alarm. He stepped into the bell chamber and felt, as he often did at that hour, that he had entered a space between worlds. The air up here was cooler, less burdened by cooking smoke and bodies. The bell hung in its usual stillness, but the light along its rim was different, softer, as if the metal were remembering the furnace long ago and finding this gentler heat unconvincing. He did not reach immediately for the cloth. Instead, he leaned his back against the opposite wall and slid down until he was seated on the narrow ledge that circled the tower's interior. From this lower angle, the bell seemed larger, its bulk an almost oppressive presence overhead. It blocked a portion of the sky visible through the opening, a curved shadow against the evening. He let his head tip back until it rested against the stone. The sounds from below rose up, layered and complex. If he listened without assigning meaning, they became a single living texture, like the rustle of a vast garment. If he focused, they separated again, one house's laughter, another's clatter, the rhythm of a hammer, the scrape of a chair. He wondered how many of these would alter if the new bell ever spoke in command rather than blessing. There were stories, he knew, of bells that summoned conscripts, that called men from plows and benches and counting tables to pick up pikes and march behind colors not of their own choosing. In those stories, the bell was often described as great or mighty. as if its volume itself were a virtue. No one ever mentioned the smaller sounds that had been swallowed in the moment the first peal rolled out. It occurred to him then, with a clarity that made him straighten, that silence was not the absence of sound so much as a kind of space between certain noises and others. The monastery's choice not to use this bell had left more room in the air for other lives to be heard. Whether or not anyone else acknowledged it, the quiet around this unused bronze was full. In the evenings, when the brothers gathered in the chapel, the novice sometimes found that his mind would drift, not to the words of the Psalms, but to an imagined map of the valley as heard from the tower. He pictured paths traced not in ink but in repeated footsteps, control points not as fortified walls but as the places where sounds converged, the market square, the well, the bridge. He knew he should push these thoughts aside as distractions, yet they came with a gentleness that made them hard to resent. Perhaps, he thought, this was what it meant to live in the shadow of a bell that had never rung, to be constantly aware of the distance between what was and what might be, measured not in doctrine, but in tones and echoes. On some nights, as he lay on his narrow cot, the tower above him like a second spine in the monastery's body, he would imagine the valley without any bells at all. No tolling for hours or masses or alarms, just the raw, uncurated sounds of people and animals and weather negotiating their days. Then he would add back, one by one, the older, familiar bells, their chimes anchoring those lives to shared points in time. The new bell remained, in these imaginings, a question mark hanging in the air, a sound whose shape he could not quite picture. Morning would find him once more on the stair, cloth and oil in hand, climbing towards that unstruck question. The world below would be tuning itself in the first light. The mills would begin their complaints. The cough would test itself against the day. The cart would jolt along its habitual route. He would step into the tower chamber, feel the cold around his ankles, and approach the bell that presided over this unrecorded symphony. He wiped away the dust that had settled overnight, small gray assertions that everything tended towards forgetting. With each slow circle of the cloth, the bronze gleamed briefly, catching what little light slipped in. The bell remained unmoving, a great patient listener that had never yet answered, allowing the valley's smaller bells to go on ringing in their own unremarked way. The day the messenger came, the air had already begun to feel wrong. It was not any one thing the novice could have named. The sky had a weight to it, a thickness that pressed the light downward so that even the whiteness on the far peaks seemed dimmed. The wind, usually busy with the work of carrying scents from river and field, moved in slow, uncertain pushes as if reluctant to commit to a direction. Sounds from the valley reached the tower with a muted edge, like voices on the other side of a closed door. He climbed the stair, as he always did, counting the steps not from habit alone, but from the need to reassure himself that some things still obeyed number and order. 67 to the narrowing, 17 to the place where stone opened into air. His hand found the familiar grooves in the wall. His breathing resolved into the steady rhythm it learned each morning. For a brief span of seconds, the day was indistinguishable from all the others that had led him here. The bell waited in its usual stillness, catching in its bronze the slow, reluctant light of a sky still undecided between gray and storm. Dust had come in the night. Dust always came. He began his work with the cloth, tracing the curve of the metal, wiping away the faint powdery film that tried to make everything equal over time. Below, the valley sounded subdued. The mills turned, but without their usual sharp complaints. The river spoke in a tone that held more caution than urgency. Even the children's voices were softer, as if someone had cupped a hand loosely over their games. Every few moments, a breath of wind pressed against the tower's openings, bringing with it the smell of distant damp earth and something else. Disturbance, perhaps, or simply the idea of it. He had just finished polishing the bell's lower rim when another sound cut in, one that did not belong to the valley's ordinary symphony. It began as a faint, irregular thudding, far along the road that snaked up from the west, the one that traders and officials used when they had business with the monastery. The rhythm was the clumsy insistence of hoof-striking stone at a pace neither relaxed nor controlled, the kind of haste that bruised both rider and mount. The novice moved to the opening and leaned out as far as prudence allowed. The road, visible in interrupted segments between trees and folds of land, revealed at last a dark shape, small against the distance, moving with a jerkiness that spoke of urgency rather than skill. A horse, foam streaking its neck. A rider bent low, cloak snapping unevenly back in the unsteady wind. Messages arrived at the monastery often enough. Petitions, requests, demands, reports. But those usually came by men walking with the patience of those whose news was important, but not desperate. The sight of the lathered horse, the way the rider's head jerked once as if fighting the pull of gravity and exhaustion, sent a thin line of unease along the novice's spine. He watched as the figure drew nearer, disappearing at times behind stands of trees, only to reappear larger, more distinct. By the time the horse reached the final incline, its hooves slipped occasionally on the steeper stones, a shower of small chips flying off with each misstep. The rider did not dismount at the gate to lead the animal, as custom dictated, but rode straight to the main courtyard, where his arrival cracked the afternoon's subdued quiet like a stone through glass. From above, the novice could not hear the words exchanged, only see the shapes of them. The way the porter's shoulders stiffened, the quick arrival of another brother who ran, rather than walked, towards the abbot's quarters. The messenger slid from the saddle with the gracelessness of one whose legs had forgotten how to stand. He fumbled at his cloak, drew out something the size of a folded hand, and held it as if it burned. A seal caught the light, red, waxen, unmistakably official. The monastery's life, usually spreading out in calm tasks and measured movements, began to draw inward as if some invisible cord had been tugged. Figures converged on the courtyard. Others disappeared indoors with sudden purpose. The novice, standing in the tower with his cloth suspended mid-motion, felt the way the day tightened around that small piece of parchment. He did not see the abbot open the message. That happened behind thick walls and a door that rarely admitted novices, but he could imagine it. The knife carefully slicing through the wax without breaking its symbol, the slow unfolding of the script, the first eyes to cross lines of ink that had started as words in some distant mind and now arrived here as weight. The bell chamber felt colder. He finished his polishing in a distracted sequence of motions, each circle of the cloth less attentive than the last. The bell's surface gleamed in places, caught the dull light in others, its inconsistencies less the result of his neglect than of the history poured into its alloy. When at last the metal reflected him back, distorted and small, he stepped away, suddenly aware of how alone he was with this unvoiced mass of potential sound. Footsteps on the stair broke the usual tower quiet. They came with more speed than monastic caution usually allowed, the quick, resolute strike of souls that had forgotten to muffle themselves. The novice turned before the visitor appeared, his body already knowing who it would be. It was not the abbot. It was one of the elder brothers, his face lined not so much by age as by years spent carrying messages between those who decided and those who obeyed. In his hand was no parchment, no seal. He carried only his breath, which came slightly shorter than usual, and the authority of words he had evidently been trusted to transmit. The instruction was brief. The bell, the new bell that had never yet spoken, was to be rung at first light the following morning, not for an internal observance, not for a feast, not to mark a holy hour. Its voice was to call the valley's men to gather in the square below, armed and ready to receive further commands. There was talk, the elder brother said, of renewed conflict, of borders disputed once more, of old grievances stirred. The city needed to move quickly, so did its instruments. The novice listened, head bowed, the words registering not as sentences, but as a shift in temperature. The elder brother spoke in a tone that was not unkind, but unyielding. The bell was an arm of the city now. They were its caretakers. They would also be its hands. The space between acceptance and refusal was not one the novice had ever considered he might have to cross. His rule training had not prepared him for choices of this scale. Obedience had been presented as a smooth, shining road, not as a cliff's edge suddenly breaking beneath his feet. When the elder brother left, his footsteps retreating down the spiral, the tower seemed emptier than it had a moment before, as if he had taken with him not only the message, but a layer of air. The novice remained standing in the center of the chamber, the bell behind him, the openings to the valley ahead, feeling as though he were inhabiting two times at once, the one in which the bell remained quiet, and the one in which its first strike had already rolled out, unreachable and secret. He moved clumsily to the nearest opening and looked down. The valley, from above, did not seem to know yet what had been decided for it. Men walked along the paths with the unhurried step of those whose thoughts were still on grain and tools, not on weapons. Smoke rose in straight, thin lines from cooking fires. In the field closest to the road, two figures stooped, backs bent to the soil, their movements slow and repetitive, like breaths. The mills turned. The river shone in a brief ribbon where the cloud cover parted. He imagined, with a clarity that made his throat tighten, how these same shapes would move differently when the bell sprang into speech. Heads snapping upward, hands dropping what they carried, doors flung open. The sound of his own hands on the rope would reach far beyond the monastery walls, translated into fear, obligation, eagerness, dread, each listener assigning it a different meaning, but all of them compelled to answer. The bell behind him was no longer just an object hanging from a beam. It was a center of gravity around which the next day would turn. He turned to face it. The metal, newly polished, caught the failing light and gave it back in a faint, uneven glow. The bell's surface seemed almost to breathe. Shadows shifted subtly with each passing cloud. He stepped closer until he could see the imperfections he knew by now like lines on a palm, the softened scar from a melted blade, the slight waviness near the crown where the mold had not held perfectly true. This was not pure bronze sprung from nowhere. It was a collected past, hammered into utility. Those who had donated the weapons melted into its shape had done so, he supposed, with a sense of righteousness. Metal that had served in killing would now serve in calling to causes deemed just or necessary. But the metal, to his mind, could no more transform its nature entirely than water could forget the shape of a riverbed once carved. The bell, silent as it was, seemed to contain within it all the possible futures its voice could set in motion. Men pulled from beds before dawn, fields left untended, bread dough abandoned on boards, rising too long, children watching doorways empty and not understanding why the air suddenly felt thinner. The novice's imagination, honed by quiet observation, filled in details the abbot's orders did not mention. he lowered himself to sit on the stone ledge again, hands resting open on his knees. There were, in the library, treatises about rightful war and obedience. He had copied some of them as part of his monastic duties, his hand moving steadily over parchment, forming letters whose full weight he had never truly tested against his own conscience. They spoke of hierarchy, of the trust placed in rulers to decide when force was necessary, of the obligation of subjects, and, by extension, monasteries, to respond when called. But none of those texts had ever described what it felt like to be the axis around which command and consequence turned. They spoke from the vantage point of policy, not of rope and bell and valley, and the lives that would tilt with the first peal. The novice stayed in the tower until the light thinned to almost nothing. Long after he should have descended for his other tasks, he remained seated, listening as the valley slid from activity into evening. Voices faded from paths. The mills slowed, then stopped, their complaints ending in a lingering creak. The cough in the house halfway down the slope returned, sharper in the chill air, then subsided. A dog barked once at some unseen disturbance, thinking better of a second protest. The older bells rang for vespers. Their tones rose around him with the familiarity of a language learned in childhood. Yet tonight, they sounded different, not in pitch, but in implication. They were markers of prayer, yes, but also reminders of how easily sound could summon bodies into patterns not of their own choosing. He descended the stairs at last with heavier steps than he had climbed them that morning. In the cloister, the brothers' faces wore the strained calm of men who had been told enough to worry, but not enough to fully understand. There was talk in low voices, not yet rumor, not yet strategy, just the restless movement of concern seeking purchase. In the abbot's eyes, when their paths crossed briefly, there was something harder than usual, a resolve edged with fatigue. Orders had been received, weighed, and accepted. The monastery would do as instructed. The bell's silence would end. Night thickened. Sleep came grudgingly to the novice's cot. Each time he drifted near it, some image pulled him back. The bell's bulk against dawn light, the thin line of the rope, the valley's roofs like so many small, vulnerable shells. He was aware, with an almost physical clarity, of the hours falling away between now and the moment he would climb the tower, with a different purpose in his hands. Obedience, he told himself in the dark, was not his to redefine, and yet the thought did not settle. It circled, restless, around another awareness, that to move the rope tomorrow would not be a gesture contained within the monastery's discipline. It would be a movement that reached into houses, into fields, into lungs that would draw breath differently because of a sound he had unleashed. Somewhere in the small hours, the wind rose. It prowled along the walls, fingered at shutters, set loose things to rattling. The bell tower, that high hollow where he had spent so many mornings, filled his imagination like a presence in the room. He could almost hear the bell's silence from here, a dense, waiting quiet that pressed on the air as much as any sound. When the first ghost of dawn began to thin the night at the edges of the window, he knew without needing to see that the hour had arrived. The day would ask something of him it had never asked before. He lay still for one final moment, feeling the fragile weight of the decision not as rebellion or compliance, but as a line, fine as thread, stretched between his hands and the valley's unknowing sleep. He rose before the bell that was meant to wake him. The cell was a rectangle of deeper dark within the broader dimness of the dormitory. The air had the chill of stone that had given up its daytime warmth hours ago, and now lay bare, unadorned. His blanket fell from his shoulders with the muted softness of surrender. For a moment, sitting on the narrow cot, he simply breathed, counting each inhalation as if it were a remaining grain of sand in an hourglass he could not turn. The monastery still slept in fragments. Somewhere along the row, a brother murmured in his dreams, the words flattened into nonsense by sleep. Another shifted, straw rustling faintly beneath the mattress cover. Someone's slow, steady snore had become part of the building's night music, so constant that only its absence would be noticeable. Outside, the wind combed at the eaves, its fingers less insistent than they had been in the small hours, as if even it were tiring of disturbing what it could not change. He lit no candle. The faint gray at the window was enough to locate his sandals, his robe, the familiar belt that circled his waist with its worn, finger-smoothed knot. In darkness, the motions of dressing felt less like preparation and more like assuming a role. He wrapped the cloth around himself and felt it close over questions he had not finished asking. The corridor outside the dormitory was a tunnel of shadow, pierced only by breathing slats of light where shutters did not quite meet. Here and there, the wind found a way in, laying thin blades of cold across his bare hands. His footsteps, soft as he tried to make them, still slipped from the stone and climbed the walls in faint echoes, announcing him to anyone or anything that might be listening. The cloister was a square of deep blue, the sky above it not yet committed to morning, just less committed to night. The arches framed the courtyard like a sequence of quiet thoughts. In the center, the dry fountain bowl held darkness as if it were water. A single lantern, left burning low near the chapter house door, laid a small puddle of gold on the flagstones, its flame unsettled by the drafts that roamed the enclosure. He stepped carefully along the cloister walk, the chill seeping up through the soles of his sandals. Each column he passed seemed to divide time as well as space. Behind this one, all the days when the bell had been only a responsibility of cloth and oil. Beyond the next, the day when it might become something else entirely. Above, the tower loomed as a heavier shadow against the paling sky, a vertebra in the monastery's spine reaching for the yet uncolored dawn. The rope that linked tower to earth hung in a small chamber off the cloister, coiled neatly like a sleeping snake. His path would take him past that door on the way to the stair. He found, as he approached, that his pace unconsciously slowed, as if his body wished to prolong the time before seeing the instrument that would translate intent into echo. Through the half-open door, he saw the rope's pale length curved upon itself, loops resting on a low wooden peg. It looked innocent, almost domestic, like washing line prepared for some day's labor of drying cloth. Only its thickness, its carefully woven strands, betrayed its purpose. This was cord made not to hold garments, but to pull a weight of bronze into movement. He did not touch it, not yet. Instead, he continued towards the narrow door that led to the tower stair. The iron latch was cold under his fingers, its chill biting into skin still warmed by the blanket's memory. The door's hinges gave a small, resigned exhale as it opened, the sound swallowed quickly by the stone throat of the stairwell. Inside, the darkness was different from that of the cloister. There, the open sky had pressed down its faint light from above. Here, the stone wrapped around him, close and blind. He knew the steps by now, could have climbed them without sight, but he allowed his fingers their usual path along the wall, tracing the familiar grooves. The staircase turned him inward on himself, spiraling his body while his thoughts tried to spiral outward into possibilities. 67 steps to the narrowing. The counting this morning felt less like reassurance and more like a litany. Each number pinned him in place. He had not yet turned back. He had not yet chosen otherwise. At 30, his breath sounded loud in the confined space, harsh against the softness of his sandals' scrape. At 45, he felt the first thin thread of wind slipping down from above, carrying with it a faint hint of the outside world. Smoke, damp stone, the clean, sharp smell that came in the moments before sunrise. 17 more. Somewhere in the body of the monastery behind him, the older bells waited, their clappers resting, their metal cooled from yesterday's use. They would be rung in their appointed order soon enough, their tones familiar and expected. He was climbing now towards a sound that had never yet been part of the valley's mornings, a note that, once struck, could never be unheard again. When he reached the top of the stair, the bell chamber greeted him with its usual hollow quiet. Yet even that seemed altered, as if the air had thickened slightly, made heavier by the knowledge it now held. The openings to the outside were darker shapes within the general dusk of the room, rectangles of a sky not yet painted with color, only intention. The bell itself was a deeper absence of light in the high center of the chamber. Its curve held the dawn's first, most uncertain gray along one edge, a thin, hesitant line. The rest of its body sank into shadow, a shadow that felt less like an absence of sun and more like a presence of unspent sound. He approached it slowly, as one might approach a person entrusted with a terrible secret. From this close, the familiar details came into focus. The softened scars of melted weapons, the slight irregularities that marked the casting as the work of human hands rather than divine perfection. His cloth lay folded on the ledge where he had left it the day before, a small mute witness to the ordinary version of his duty. Dust had not yet had time to claim a new layer. The bell did not need cleaning this morning. It needed something else. He laid his palm against the metal. It was colder than the air around it, as if it had kept the night more thoroughly than stone. Beneath his hand, there was no tremor, no hint of movement. A bell at rest was simply a shape, an architecture of potential. Its voice did not exist until someone decided to give it breath. He closed his eyes. In the darkness behind his lids, he tried to imagine the sound it would make. He had heard bells of similar size in other towers, had felt their vibrations travel down the ropes into the bones of those who pulled them. But each bell was its own beast, its tone determined by thickness and diameter, and 100 small decisions made by craftsmen whose names most would never know. Would this one's voice be bright and cutting, slicing into valleys and mines with cold clarity? Or would it emerge as a heavier, more somber toll, rolling over rooftops like a command wrapped in mourning? He could not know. The only way to answer would be to pull the rope. He dropped his hand from the metal and moved to one of the openings. The valley lay beneath him in a hush that was not yet fully awake, but no longer quite asleep. The sky above the far hills had paled to the color of breath on glass, a fragile opacity that promised more light, but had not yet delivered it. Roofs were still mostly dark, windows blank, paths empty. Only a few faint smudges of smoke rose from early fires, tentative and thin. He could sense, rather than see, the lives inside those quiet boxes of stone and wood. A woman turning on her pallet, reaching out to check if the banked embers in the hearth still held warmth. A child curled against a coarser blanket, caught in some unremembered dream. An old man sitting up because pain had woken him before light did. The cough, somewhere halfway down the slope, might be there, gathering itself for its morning work, or it might have stilled forever in the hours he had spent wrestling with questions in his bed. If he rang the bell now, the valley's stillness would shatter along every seam. He pictured it, the sudden, unfamiliar shock of sound tearing through the last folds of night, startling birds from eaves, jolting hearts in chests. The resonance would run along beams and down chimneys, would vibrate in cups and spoons and sleeping teeth. People would sit up too quickly, breath catching. There would be a moment, a single shared heartbeat, where no one yet knew why the bell was speaking in this new, urgent voice. Then understanding would spread, not from knowledge, but from instinct. Summons. Men would reach for boots, for belts, for whatever makeshift weapon could be grabbed from its place on a wall or under a bed. Women would hold back questions with tight mouths, fingers already moving towards cloaks and bread and children. The paths he now saw empty would fill with figures moving quickly towards the invisible center where the sound had told them to gather. All of that from the simple motion of his hands gripping the rope and pulling. He stepped back from the opening, the thought too large to stare at directly. The bell chamber seemed to tilt slightly, or perhaps it was only his perception that shifted. For a moment, he felt as if he were standing at the fulcrum of a scale on which nothing less than the shape of the day, perhaps the shape of many days, would balance. Obedience was not in question, he told himself once more. The order had come. It bore seals and signatures and the weight of structures far older than he. The monastery had accepted. The bell was to be rung. Yet obedience, he realized with a clarity that felt almost like fear, did not erase the fact that a human hand would still have to move the rope. He returned to the bell and sat down on the low ledge, his back against the cool stone, his knees drawn up slightly, robes folding around him like a second skin. Above, the bell's dark bulk loomed, invisible now except as a heavier concentration of absence against the ceiling's faint outline. He could not see it, but he could feel its presence all the same, an unspoken question hanging over his bent head. In the silent chamber, his thoughts uncoiled slowly, like smoke in still air. There were those who would say that his role was small, almost mechanical. He was a link in a chain, nothing more. Orders flowed from rulers to councils to abbots to brothers to him, each link receiving, passing, doing. To pause, to hesitate, was to imagine that the chain's strength could be altered by the doubt of a single, lower segment. And yet, he thought, any chain could be halted, rerouted, made to lie slack by something as small as one hand refusing to pull. He did not think of it as rebellion. The word did not fit the narrowness of the space in which he sat, nor the way his heart beat. Not with the wildness of defiance, but with the heavy, slow insistence of someone counting consequences. His mind returned, again and again, not to the abstractions of city and border, but to the very concrete sounds he had come to know: the mills, the river, the cough, the cart, the laughter, the clatter of daily breakages. These were the notes that would be altered first, long before anyone wrote a chronicle or carved a memorial. Somewhere outside, a faint paling at the edge of the sky deepened, like a bruise changing color. The first true thread of dawn began to draw itself along the hills, a line so fine it might have been imagined. Time was moving, whether he moved with it or not. He rose. The motion was simple, the same as it had been on countless other mornings when his task had involved only cloth and dust. But this time, the air seemed to notice. The small draft that forever wandered the tower paused, then resumed with renewed intent, brushing against his face with a cool, almost questioning touch. He went to the stair, descended not all the way, but only as far as the chamber where the rope waited. There it was, as he had seen it earlier, coiled upon itself with the deceptive docility of something that might at any moment straighten and show its full length. He reached out and rested his fingertips on its outermost loop, feeling the roughness of the fibers, the faint residue of wax and oil from years of hands. It felt alive only in potential. For a moment he held it that way, with fingertips only, not closing his fist. Then, with a small exhale, he let his hand fall back to his side. The bell above remained silent. The sky beyond the cloister's arches was shifting from blue to a color that could soon be called morning. Somewhere in the valley, someone was lighting the first proper fire of the day. The wind carried up the brief, sharp scent of kindling catching. The river's voice lifted modestly, testing the new light. The cough came again, a stubborn, familiar punctuation in the distance. He understood in that moment that not pulling the rope would also be a kind of ringing. It would send out its own invisible ripple, one that might never be traced back to him by any eye or pen, but would nonetheless shape what followed. Men not roused, fields not left, bread not burned by neglect. A morning unfolding as if no command had been sent at all. He stood between two futures, his hand empty, the rope untouched, the bell above him holding its breath with a patience vast enough to swallow either choice. Dawn did not break so much as seep. The first true light came as a thinning of darkness at the edges of things, a paler outline to the hills, a softening of the sky's implacable black into something that could, with generosity, be called blue. The monastery's walls emerged slowly from obscurity, their surfaces gaining definition where earlier there had been only suggestion. Frost showed itself on the cloister tiles in a faint, granular sheen. In the rope chamber, the novice stood very still. The coil of rope before him had shifted from invisible shadow to a muted, fibrous shape. As the light grew, the twisted hemp gained texture. Unruly strands here and there, darker marks where hands had grasped it in the past, the faint gleam of the point at which it disappeared upward into the ceiling's small round opening, connecting earth to bronze. It would take only a few steps to cross the room. Only the turning of his wrist to free the first loop from its peg. Only the closing of fingers around the thick cord. Only a pull. He could almost feel the weight of that imagined motion in his muscles, as if they ached from an exertion not yet made. Outside the narrow window, the world waited unawares. The roofs in the valley still held the night's chill in their tiles. Bare branches traced black filigree against the blankness of the sky. No smoke, yet rose from hearths in steady columns, only the occasional tentative wisp, where someone early to rise had bent over embers and coaxed them back into flame. He knew, without needing to see, that the hour named in the abbot's instruction had arrived. There was a strange, suspended quality to time in that small room. It felt as if the monastery's bells had ceased to exist, as if no hour would ever be marked again except by this one choice. His breath sounded loud to him, the roughness of it scraping in his throat. His heart beat not in his chest alone, but in his palms, in his temples, in the hollow at the base of his neck. He reached out. His fingers closed slowly, deliberately, around the rope. The hemp bit into his skin with familiar resistance. He had pulled other ropes before, on smaller bells, on older bells, on the cords that closed shutters against storm. His hands knew how to tighten, to brace, to become conduits for instruction. For a moment, he held the rope without moving it. In that narrow margin between grip and action, he saw again the map of sounds that had become as intimate to him as the Psalms. The cough that might or might not come this morning. The cart's eventual protest as it met the incline. the mill's reluctant groan, the children's shrill, bright intrusion, the low hum of women's voices at the well. These, too, were orders of a kind, but they came from hunger, from habit, from care, not from seals and signatures. If he rang, the day would rearrange itself around that sound. Paths would be abandoned for others. Tools would be left idle. Words would be spoken that would not otherwise have been said. Certain silences would be imposed where laughter might have lived. The valley would pivot on an axis far above it, its people folded into patterns whose lines they had not drawn. If he did not ring, the day would continue as it had meant to. Ordinary, unremarkable, vulnerable, complete. The rope in his hand waited for a decision. He let it go. The gesture was small, almost invisible. The slow opening of fingers, the faint scrape as the rope settled back against its own coils. Yet, in the novice's body, it felt like stepping away from the edge of some unseen drop. He did not step back immediately. He watched his hand as if it belonged to someone else, watched the muscles relax, watched the skin resume its usual color where the pressure of the hemp had briefly whitened it. For a long time, minutes, perhaps, or only seconds stretched thin, nothing happened. The bell above remained a dark, patient weight suspended in its tower. No sudden, uncommanded sound burst from it to betray him. The tower walls did not close in accusation. The air did not thicken with some divine disapproval. The only movement came from the wind probing at the edges of the stone, and from the slow, implacable brightening of the rectangle of sky visible through the high slit in the rope chamber's wall. He stepped back, one pace, then another. In the cloister outside, the day began to declare itself in more familiar ways. Somewhere a door opened with a reluctant creak. Footsteps moved across flagstones, the rhythm unhurried, carrying none of the urgency that would have accompanied a war summons. A throat cleared. A ladle clinked against the inside of a pot in the kitchen. The older bells, their duty unchanged, gave a single low note, a test more than a call. No one came running to ask why the new bell had spoken too soon, or not at all. He walked back through the cloister, his body moving with the economy of long practice. The frost on the stones had begun to surrender where his sandals passed, leaving faint, damp footprints that would vanish as the sun found its way into the courtyard. The lantern by the chapter house door had burned down to a smaller flame, its pool of light shrinking, losing its authority. In the refectory, the brothers gathered for the first prayers of the day, their faces, lined or smooth, drowsy or composed, turned towards the familiar words. The abbot's voice rose and fell, carrying the psalms through the chill air. If he felt surprise at the absence of the new bell's summons, he did not let it ripple the surface of his demeanor. Perhaps he had misjudged the hour. Perhaps he had expected the novice to be more literal than he had been. Perhaps he, too, had woken with a weight in his chest and had chosen silence, giving no further instruction in the last dark stretch before dawn. The novice's lips shaped the words he had known for years, but his mind remained half in the tower, listening for a sound that did not come. After prayers, the day scattered itself into tasks. Bread needed slicing, floors needed sweeping, treatises required copying. There were no sudden mustering of men, no unusual bustle in the courtyard, no stream of armed figures making their way down the path towards the valley. The order from the city existed still, in parchment and ink and the minds of those who had read it, but its echo did not extend beyond those confines. It had not yet entered the thick, resistant medium of lived hours. Mid-morning, another rider came. This one did not arrive in a flurry of foam and flying gravel. but with a steady trot, as if he had measured his urgency against the distance and found a sustainable compromise. His horse's flanks were damp, but not shaking. The porter's greeting from above sounded less startled. The novice, carrying a basket of loaves across the courtyard, saw the exchange only in passing, the handing over of a letter, the bow of a head, the brief vanishing of both messenger and message into the abbot's quarters. The monastery's breathing changed again in subtler ways. Those who were closest to the abbot's circle moved with a slight quickening, a faint relaxing of shoulders or tightening of lips depending on what little they had been told. A few glances crossed the courtyard, sharp with questions that would not be voiced. The novice delivered his basket where it was needed, the smell of fresh bread rising around him, and returned to his duties without asking. By the time the midday meal was served, the shape of the new letter's contents had begun to circulate, thinned and altered by retelling, but recognizable under its embellishments. Some spoke of negotiations that had shifted, of a dispute postponed, of a different border now under immediate consideration. Others framed it in terms of divine providence, of averted bloodshed, of tempers cooled. The bell had not been needed after all, they said. The order to muster had been suspended almost as soon as it was sent. The novice listened, eyes lowered over his bowl. From where he sat, he could see the bell tower through one of the refectory's small windows, its upper openings cut into the sky. It looked no different than it had on all the mornings when it had been only an unused potential. Birds rode the drafts near its crown, unfazed by whatever decisions had passed beneath it. To anyone else, it was merely a section of the monastery's silhouette. For him, it had become something else, the narrow gap between two streams of time. It would have been easy in that moment to decide that his choice had been irrelevant, that the writing and rescinding of orders in places he would never see had already determined that no call to arms would be needed, that his hand on the rope, his letting go, had taken place within a story whose outcome had already been altered elsewhere. Easy, too, to imagine the alternate version, that if he had rung, men would have gathered, only for another messenger to arrive breathless in the square, waving the later decree, sending them back to their homes with frayed nerves, and a new, unsettled layer of mistrust between town and city, between laity and monastery. The true shape of what might have been would never be known. What remained, solid and undeniable, was the morning that had unfolded without the bell. He thought of the valley as he had seen it in that tentative light, roofs slowly taking on definition, smoke rising in hesitant threads, paths empty, then gradually populated by figures with buckets, with tools, with baskets, the cough or its silence, the mills starting up at their usual hour, their protests unchanged, the cart with its complaining wheels coming into view along the lower road at the time he had come to expect, not hurried, not delayed, its driver's posture suggesting nothing more urgent than the day's deliveries. Elsewhere, perhaps, men gathered in other squares at the bidding of other bells. Elsewhere, doors opened with different fears behind them. Elsewhere, someone like him had wrapped hands around a rope and pulled, feeling the vibration of metal travel up into his bones. The world was never saved or condemned in one place alone. Yet here, in this valley, on this particular morning, the chain had failed to close around one small, intended link. In the afternoon, he climbed the tower again. He did so without being ordered to. His duty, in the written sense, did not require a second visit that day. But the bell had become, in his mind, a kind of confidant, and it felt wrong to let the hours pass without acknowledging what had not occurred. The tower was brighter now, the light stronger, filling the chamber with an honest, unsparing illumination. Dust motes made themselves known, performing their slow, aimless ballet in the narrow beams. The bell, in full view, showed its color more plainly, a dull, aged bronze that caught the sun, not in sharp glints, but in a soft, steady sheen. He approached it as he always did, cloth in hand. The metal did not look any different. No sign marked it as having hovered on the brink of speech. It was only his own gaze that had changed, reading into the same curves and scars a history that included, now, not only the furnace and the casting, but the mourning of unmade sound. He wiped it nonetheless, honoring the arrangement between them. He would keep it ready. It would keep its counsel. Below, the valley sounded like itself. Children shouted near the river. A mill wheel, one he had worried about, finally gave a new, harsher protest, confirming his earlier suspicion that a repair would soon be necessary. The cough returned, thinner than before, but present. Somewhere, someone sang to themselves over a task, the tune too distant to recognize but carrying the shape of contentment more than despair. The older bells rang for the evening offices. Their voices wove through the tower, familiar threads of bronze and air. The new bell remained still, absorbing rather than producing resonance. Sound touched it and moved on, its surface reflecting nothing more than light. As the sun slid towards the line of hills and the valley's colors deepened into richer browns and muted greens, the novice leaned once more against the tower's low opening. The fields below, seen under this angle of light, seemed both eternal and painfully temporary. Furrows carved by generations, each season's work adding to a pattern that weather and war might one day erase. He thought, not in words so much as in feeling, of what it meant to be part of history's machinery. Most people would never know when they had tilted an event one way or another. Their days would pass in work and rest, their choices weaving into larger tapestries without leaving their names on the selvage. Chroniclers would write of campaigns, of treaties, of plagues and councils and dynasties. Bells would be rung and recorded for coronations, for funerals, for alarms that had justified themselves in visible outcomes. No parchment, he knew, would ever mention that on this particular morning, the bell in the monastery above the valley had not been rung when it might have been. No account would note that for reasons no one discussed, the men in these houses had turned out to their fields and workshops instead of to the square. It would be as if this small pocket of normalcy had never been at risk. He did not crave that it be known. The thought of anyone praising or condemning what he had done made his skin feel too tight. The absence itself was sufficient. The unbroken pattern of footsteps on familiar paths, the continuity of sounds he had come to recognize as the valley's signature. As the light thinned and the first evening chill slid along the stones, he let his gaze rest on the bell one final time. To others, it would be forever the bell that had been commissioned, cast, raised, and, depending on decisions yet to be made, eventually used. To him, it would always also be the bell that had held, within its unstruck metal, one morning's worth of war that never arrived. He descended the stairs with the slow care of someone carrying something fragile, though his hands were empty. Night gathered again around the monastery. Candles were lit, their small flames pushing back the dark in modest circles. The older bells spoke the hours into the air, their echoes moving out over roofs and fields and the river's patient course. The new bell did not join them. In the valley below, a child fell asleep to the sound of their mother's voice, unbroken by any harsher summons. A man rinsed the day's dirt from his hands, thinking of tomorrow's work, not of tomorrow's march. The cough returned once more in the deep of evening, stubborn, familiar, a thread of mortality woven into the fabric of continuance. History would remember other days, other bells, other valleys where the air had shaken with commands and the ground had received the weight of marching feet. It would record numbers and outcomes, victories and losses traced across maps like scars. Of this morning, and of the choice that left it untouched, the chronicles would say nothing. History would remember the wars that were fought, but not the morning when a single unheard bell allowed a small valley to wake in its own unbroken song.